play it any louder, then it's getting shut down.
My name is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. Today is September 16th, 2025. It is 7:25 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Here are the top U.S. news highlights for the past 24 hours. Trump files a $15 billion defamation libel suit versus the New York Times, filed in federal court in Florida, and publicly announced today the suit names reporters and the paper and accuses them of false and defamatory material. So for clarity, with this particular lawsuit, the New York Times is worth like $9 billion and Trump wants $15 billion. So it's not even a realistic lawsuit. It's just a joke from the... I mean, I would say the whole headline is a freaking punchline. Judge rules the administration's mass termination of probationary federal workers illegal. A federal judge concluded the mass probationary firings were unlawful, but declined to order wholesale rehiring. The decision was reported within the last 24 hours. This is a direct legal check on an employment policy of the administration. Other law-related pressure from corporate and legal community reporting today shows a subset of law firms that were targeted by the administration's directives. They have sued and challenged those actions. The litigation and firm responses are continuing to unfold. Let's see if we can find any information on this. Okay, previous reporting shows that some of the directives issued by the administration, which began in early 2025, sought to penalize specific law firms for their past work, including litigation against the government, ties to political opponents, and diversity and inclusion policies. These directives included measures such as revoking security clearances, restricting access to federal buildings and officials, terminating government contracts with the firms or their clients. In response, several of the targeted firms, including Perkins Coie, Jenner and Block, and Wilmer Hale, sued the administration, arguing that the directives were unconstitutional. Federal judges have so far ruled in favor of the firms, citing violations of the First Amendment's protections of freedom of speech and association. The administration has since appealed some of these decisions. Other firms, such as Paul Weiss and Skadden, have entered into agreements with the administration, which has resulted in the directives against them being rescinded. Additionally, the American Bar Association, ABA, has filed its own lawsuit to protect its members and the legal profession from what it describes as intimidation and a chilling effect on lawyers' ability to represent clients and take on pro bono work. Federal law enforcement National Guard surge to Memphis, announced Chicago named as possible next target. The administration announced a multi-agency enforcement surge to Memphis, National Guard plus federal law enforcement elements focused on crime, drug enforcement. Officials signaled Chicago could be next. Local officials have publicly pushed back. This is an internal mobilization of federal forces on U.S. soil, reported in the last 24 hours. U.S. strike on the Caribbean on an alleged Venezuelan drug vessel. Overseas kinetic strike, but high regional risk. The president announced a military strike that killed 3 people on a vessel the U.S. alleges was trafficking drugs. Venezuela condemned the action while this was in international waters as part of an escalatory enforcement posture tied to domestic narcotics policy. With that being said, Donald Trump was also filmed in regards to this, making jokes about killing the fishing industry in the area. I just wanted to make sure that I point that out. Policy shifts and institutional power, risks to citizen well-being, CDC leadership turmoil, and broader HHS CDC staffing shakeups recent weeks remain an ongoing risk to public health institutional capacity. The ouster of the CDC director and subsequent senior resignations have been widely reported over the last several weeks. Those developments and related personnel policy moves at HHS continued to be cited by public health experts as a potential medium risk to preparedness and response. While the highest profile moves happened over recent weeks, they are still feeding official and expert concern now. No single nationwide infrastructure collapse reported in the past 24 hours. No major national scale grid failure or transportation collapse in the past day. Routine localized outages were reported in separate local outlets. Ongoing litigation and administration directives aimed at law firms and corporate actors. I just pushed the wrong button. Okay, yeah, so law firms that were targeted by the administration, they've sued. Where's I at? Okay, ongoing litigation and administration directives aimed at law firms and corporate actors reported today could have downstream effects on access to counsel for some groups and on corporate legal costs, worth monitoring as a systemic business cost pressure. Something to point out, too, I mean, for me, from my own perspective, it kind of looks like the president and co-conspirators during the pandemic, while Biden was in office, looted about $2 to $3 trillion of tax revenue from our government. And it looks like all the people that they are dehumanizing and treating like crap right now are the victims of those crimes, which would be marginalized communities, women, people of color, anybody who's not a white male, have been victimized by this administration, particularly low-income individuals. And they're making it so the courts are getting clogged up, and they're also making it so people can't get fucking lawyers to defend themselves. Imagine that. I just wanted to point that out. Public health updates. Staffing and leadership departures reported in recent weeks will remain the primary public health institutional story right now. Experts warn that those changes could hamper response capacity over time. International relations. U.S. military strike on the Caribbean versus an alleged Venezuelan drug boat. Alleged. We're just assuming that this boat had Venezuelan drug dealers. You know, no proof, no evidence, but we'll just make that assumption. The strike, reported today, may have diplomatic fallout and elevates regional tensions. It also shapes domestic politics and federal law enforcement priorities. Trade diplomacy items of high relevance reported in the last 24 hours. Ongoing U.S.-China trade talks and negotiations over items such as TikTok and tariffs are active. These remain important for trade policy, but were covered separately in trade reporting today. Legal actions against the Trump administration, court ruling, mass probationary firings, illegal. This is the single most significant adverse ruling against an administration employment policy. In the past 24 hours, lawsuits and firm challenges persist. Multiple firms and parties are litigating to challenge directives and coercive pressure from the administration. Reuters reported on those actions today. These cases could generate additional legal constraints or remedies. Memphis deployment fallout. Look for legal filings from city and state officials. National Guard activation orders and whether such federal deployments expand to Chicago or other cities. Follow up on probationary firings decision. Check for agency compliance letters. Additional suits seeking reinstatement or damages and any appellate filings. For the Venezuelan, the attack on Venezuela that the President of the United States initiated as an aggressor, in my opinion. Monitor congressional hearings, State Department exchanges with Venezuela, and any additional strikes or developments. HHS staffing announcements. Watch for new appointments, whistleblower letters, or sudden guidance changes that would immediately affect public health. The stock markets today closed with the S&P 500 down 0.13%. The Dow Jones down 0.3%. And the NASDAQ down 0.1%. And here are the key U.S. trade and economic highlights. Manufacturing output rebounds. U.S. manufacturing output rose by 0.2% in August, despite forecasts expecting a 0.2% decline. The uptick was driven by a rebound in motor vehicles and parts production, as well as non-durables such as textiles, petroleum, coal, and certain food products. Year over year, manufacturing rose about 0.9%. Meanwhile, mining output rose 0.9%, but utility output fell 2.0%. Capacity utilization remains below long-term averages. New tariffs under consideration on auto parts. That's great. The auto industry is one of the few industries that appears to be performing right now, as what I just quite literally just explained. But that's okay. Donald Trump will put tariffs on it to make it so nobody can afford to live, and we'll make sure that these businesses go out of business, because that's Donald Trump's prerogative. That is MAGA's prerogative. That is the administration's prerogative. Manipulate the markets and shut down anybody who's not a co-conspirator. New tariffs under consideration on auto parts, national security rationale. The Commerce Department is contemplating additional tariffs on imported auto parts, citing national security concerns. These would target parts used in sectors like alternative propulsion and autonomous vehicles. This builds on earlier tariff moves, e.g. steel, aluminum, motor vehicle imports, and has raised concerns among business groups about cost, complexity, and unpredictability. I think the unpredictability part is really pissing a lot of people off. Let's just tariff everything. Let's just make it so nobody can afford to live. Fuck America. Fuck it all. Just fuck it all, dude. Fuck it all. That's where we're at. Okay? Retail sales stronger than expected in August. Retail sales rose by 0.6% month over month. In August, surprising many analysts who forecast smaller gains. Core retail sales, excluding volatile categories, rose 0.7%. The increase spanned autos, apparel, online retail, and dining. However, inflation, weak labor markets, and tariff effects may reduce momentum going forward. U.S. economy facing twin housing and labor market headwinds. Don't worry, there's all these commercials explaining to you that the MAGAs are going to come in and swoop up and buy your houses when you can't afford to live anymore. The economy shows signs of stress from the combination of weakening labor market with rising unemployment and jobless claims and fewer job openings. Strains in housing, high mortgage payments, and very low affordability. These pressures could weigh on consumer spending and broader economic growth. Dollar hits 4-year low versus euro ahead of Fed meeting. U.S. dollar has slid to its weakest level versus the euro in roughly 4 years, driven by growing expectations that the Federal Reserve will begin cutting rates. The U.S. dollar index fell, reflecting weaker investor confidence in holding U.S. dollar assets under the expectation of easing monetary policy. When they decide to cut interest rates prematurely, everybody's going to go running to get money that they can't afford to pay back. And we're going to go broke. We're going to go into debt. And anybody who's stupid enough to participate in that is going to turn into a debt slave, in my opinion. Trade tensions, talks with India. The U.S. and India are resuming trade talks. The context here, U.S. recently imposed tariffs on Indian goods over purchases of Russian oil, which saw Indian exports to the U.S. drop in August. Exports from India fell from $8.01 billion in July to $6.86 billion in July. That is exports from India. He just fucked their exports by $2 billion, just so everybody knows. In August, imports also declined, leading to a narrower trade deficit. These talks are seen as potentially resetting or ameliorating trade relationships under tariffs pressure. Political pressure for trade deal aimed at China's overproduction. Democratic lawmakers have pressed the administration to get trade deals or agreements, possibly via international cooperation that explicitly addresses China's overcapacity in industries like steel and solar panels, which they argue harm U.S. industries through depressed prices and unfair competition. And remember, kids, the stock market is not the economy. Just because the S&P 500 or Dow Jones may be performing does not mean that wages are growing, jobs are secure, inflation is under control, or that people are thriving. And here is the hazardous weather outlook for the next few days. Southwest, Four Corners, and Colorado-Utah region. Gravel terrain and high terrain areas in western Colorado and eastern Utah are expecting widespread showers and thunderstorms today. These storms may bring gusty winds, hail, and brief heavy rainfall, especially in mountainous terrain. Over the next couple days, Wednesdays onward, storm coverage is expected to decrease. Isolated showers and storms possible along the divide, but mostly dry weather returns with limited precipitation through the immediate weekend. Georgia, north and central today afternoon through roughly 9 p.m. local isolated thunderstorms possible in north and central Georgia. Some risk of heavy rain or localized downpours, but nothing indicating widespread severe weather. From Wednesday onward, no significant hazardous weather expected in that region. Southeast general area, no broad hazard outlooks beyond isolated thunderstorms in north and central Georgia. The rest of southeast is not under any strong hazard advisories. Other regions, no newly issued warnings or advisories for severe weather. So that's probably why today's weather is a little bit shorter. Take this as your prompt to check your local weather forecast. But I would assume that this means everything is calm and cool over the next few days. No significant weather hazards. And in international news, U.S. designation of Colombia and Venezuela for failed demonstrably counter-narcotics obligations. On September 15, 2025, the U.S. submitted to Congress a designation that Colombia, Venezuela, Afghanistan, Bolivia, and Burma have failed to meet international counter-narcotics obligations. For Colombia, concerns include record coca cultivation and what the U.S. says are ineffective drug control strategies. Venezuela is accused of leading major cocaine trafficking network. The designation could result in cuts to U.S.A. Colombian officials protested the designation, arguing their anti-drug efforts are being ignored. What? Did your drug dealer in Venezuela get pissed at you or something, and that's why this is happening? What's going on here? This whole shit with starting a fight with Venezuela is fucking weird. Okay? U.S. strikes another alleged Venezuelan drug trafficking boat. President Trump announced a second U.S. military strike in international waters against a Venezuelan boat allegedly involved in drug trafficking. 3 people were reported killed. This follows a prior strike which killed 11 on board another vessel alleged to be linked with the Tren de Aragua gang. Again, this is not the first time that Trump has made these allegations, and there's no proof so far that we have been presented with, showing that these people are Tren de Aragua. So it's very questionable. Venezuela's President Maduro condemned the action as aggression. China strongly objects to U.S. military buildup near Venezuela. On September 15, 2025, China's foreign ministry spokesperson Lin Yan criticized U.S. military deployment near Venezuelan waters, calling it seriously undermining regional peace and stability. China objected to what it described as violations of Venezuelan sovereignty and international law, urging the U.S. to refrain from using force and to avoid interfering in international affairs. UK-U.S. tech pact worth $42 billion. Britain and the United States agreed to a technology cooperation pact valued at $31 billion, U.S. $42 billion. The deal centers on AI, quantum computing, and civil nuclear energy. Major U.S. companies, e.g. Microsoft, are significant participants in the investment. U.S.-China trade deal to keep TikTok operating in the U.S. as part of resumed trade tech negotiations. The U.S. and China have reportedly reached a framework allowing TikTok to continue operations in the U.S. under certain terms. Those specific conditions are not yet fully disclosed. Maduro decries U.S. actions as aggression and cuts off some diplomatic communication. Following recent strikes and deploying of U.S. naval forces near Venezuelan waters, Maduro has labeled U.S. behavior as aggression, accusing it of severing or severely reducing diplomatic communication. This concludes today's news report. Stay safe out there.